So Israel has dramatically escalated its military strikes on Gaza despite growing calls for an immediate ceasefire and an unconditional end to its blockade. At least 66 Palestinians have been killed since early on Saturday. In the north, an entire residential block has been flattened in an Israeli air raid. In the south, 3 members of the same family were killed in a strike on their home. And hospitals are struggling with more critical injuries and cases of malnourishment after more than 2 months of blockade. Well, Israel has confirmed it's in the early stages of a new military assault on Gaza. Thousands more troops are expected to be deployed as part of this operation. The army has said it plans to forcibly displace Palestinians once again to the south. Israel plans to consolidate the seizure of territory. The army says it will, quote, seize and control what it calls strategic areas of Gaza. Let's cross to Hind, who's live for us in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. So, Hind, another day, another uptick in violence and more killings by Israel.
And one of the most deadliest days in Deir al-Balah, in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, where at least 18 Palestinians have been killed in the past hour and a half. The Israeli forces targeted Abu Libda family, where at least 9 Palestinians have been killed. Among them is 3-year-old Muhammad, 1-week-old Qusay, and Siwar, 4-year-old, where these Palestinian children were injured and then they were severely injured and then they died after the wounds they sustained. And also there has been another attack on one of the warehouses that had a little bit of food left, where at least 6 Palestinians were killed. Among them is at least 1 woman. And also there has been another attack on a group of Palestinians in the market, in one of the most busy streets in Deir al-Balah, where at least 5 other children were injured, critically injured, and they were transferred to the hospital. As you see behind me, the Al-Aqsa hospital has been chaotic, very heartbreaking moments where families were crying, mothers were crying, and they're also waiting for their injured family members that are inside the hospital right now. The hospital has been very crowded in the past couple hours, where doctors are saying that they need to prioritize cases, and there has been no medical supplies across the Gaza Strip. But it's not only here in Deir al-Balah, also the northern Gaza Strip has been very, very, very dangerous, where Palestinians are on the move, evacuating from their houses in Jabalia's refugee camp. But also in the past couple of hours, at least 3 houses have been targeted by the Israeli forces. Most of these houses have been overwhelmed with Palestinians that were seeking refuge in those houses, and civil defense teams are saying that they are trying to search for the bodies trapped under the rubble. According to doctors, they say that the death toll for today is expected to rise, where most of a big number of Palestinians are still trapped under the rubble, and paramedics and civil defense teams are still working. But also not forget the fact that there has been a very strict blockade on the Gaza Strip, banning medical supplies and medication. This is why the chance of those Palestinians injured to live is very, very little. Doctors are saying that most of those injured are dying because there's no medication and they can't help them in any way.
Yeah, another grim day in Gaza. Hind, thanks for that update. Hind there in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Let's cross now to Hamdah Salhut, who joins us from the Jordanian capital of Amman. And, of course, she's there because the Israeli government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So, Hamdah, this definitive uptick in violence, what does Israel say the goal of this operation is?
Well, the Israeli Security Cabinet unanimously approved these plans just a couple of weeks ago in a meeting, saying that this was in order to achieve an absolute victory in Israel's war on Gaza, but also an effort to release the remaining Israeli captives. They say that military pressure is the best way to do that. Now, these new combat plans were presented by the Israeli Army Chief of Staff, who took his position back in March during the ceasefire deal, but it's also worth mentioning that the Israeli Prime Minister, just within the last few days, has been saying that Gaza is going to see something unlike anything it has seen before within the last 19 months. Other members of his government were saying that the gates of hell are going to be opened on the Gaza Strip. And these intensified airstrikes that have been killing hundreds of Palestinians within the last several days are part of that new plan. So there's initially going to be this intensified air campaign. And remember that the military has called up 60,000 reservists in an effort to try and reinvade on the ground, first from the north, pushing Palestinians toward the south. And they're going to occupy, they say, strategic areas in the Gaza Strip. They say they're going to take over parts of the Palestinian territory, if not all of it. This is something that members of the right-wing government were promised by Netanyahu several months ago, saying that there would be this complete takeover of the Palestinian territory.
And Hamdah, what of efforts to try and find some means of agreeing to a ceasefire between the two sides?
Well, there are negotiations currently happening in the Qatari capital, Doha, but according to some of these leaks, mediators are incredibly frustrated because the Israelis are not really interested in a deal. Remember that they went into these negotiations with a mandate that was quite limited. Netanyahu said that he would agree to a temporary pause in the fighting, upwards of 40 days, in order to release as many Israeli hostages as possible without committing to an end of the war. Now, Hamas says that they're also in Doha trying to negotiate without any sort of preconditions. Hamas says that they want an end of the war. Hamas officials have been speaking within the last several days and several months, saying that they would be willing to release all of the captives in one large exchange. In exchange, though, for an end of the war, something Israel is not committed to. So while these talks are ongoing, there's a lot of pressure internationally on Israel. Remember, you have the U.S. president on his trip to the Gulf who said that Gaza is starving. This is the third month of Israel's total blockade on aid. And you have upwards of 10 European countries, many of which are allies with Israel, who have said that the situation that is unfolding is quite catastrophic. The Americans have said that the best way to bring about the release of the captives is through diplomacy means, but the Israelis think otherwise.
Hamdah, thanks for that. Hamdah Salhut there in Amman in Jordan. Let's hear now from Gideon Levy, who's a columnist at the Haaretz newspaper. He says Israel's continuation of the war will be to its own detriment.
Israel was not part of what happened, the good things and the bad things, mainly the good things which happened in the last week in the Gulf, because Israel is still speaking only in shooting and bombing. And that's the reason why Israel was not invited. As long as Israel insists on continuing the war and continuing to occupy Gaza, there's no room for Israel around this table in the Gulf. Donald Trump is changing his mood very quickly, and in one moment he's a man of peace, and the next day he does nothing to stop Israel now in Gaza, which a man of peace should have done and could have done. He could easily do it, and the personal relationship are not so relevant here. The fact is that Israel was left behind in Doha, in the Emirates, and in Saudi Arabia. And it shows that Israel has no room in this so-called new Middle East, much because of its own policy, because of sticking to war without any purpose and sticking to this horrible, horrible catastrophe in Gaza.
Well, let's take this on here on the set with Sultan Barakat, who's Professor of Public Policy at the Hamad Bin Khalifa University. Sultan, welcome.
Thank you.
Much to discuss. So first, let's home in on Israel's intensifying operation in Gaza. What do you see their objective is here?
Well, clearly the objective is to determine who calls the shots in the Middle East. And Netanyahu, as you would have noticed in the last few days, was pushed aside a little bit by the Americans, ignored to some extent. They went ahead with their deal with the Houthi. They went ahead with the release of the American-Israeli soldier. And also they went ahead with the sanctions on Syria, and now they're talking about the possibility of talking to Iran.
Right, and also
so
Trump didn't visit Israel.
And of course he didn't visit, but all of these issues are central to his understanding of the security of Israel, which is built on aggression, violence, security by force. So now he's just trying to show everyone that he still is the man in the driving seat, regardless of what Trump has said, and regardless of how much the relationship between Trump and the Arab states is developed, and the amount of investments, etc., that's coming to the region. he is determined to continue his own agenda. So that's one factor. The second is because he simply feels he can. I mean, he's got the power, he's got the equipment, and no one there to deter him or to stop him. I mean, he's been at this for almost 2 years now.
Right. When Donald Trump was in the region, he left yesterday, he did say something had to be done about the situation in Gaza and intimated that he was on it. But will he bring any pressure to bear on Netanyahu, given the growing condemnation that there is about it?
Well, he's on it in the sense that he's asked and got Netanyahu to send his negotiation team to Doha. But are they serious negotiators? They're not. I mean, is it serious that... I mean, I don't understand how these talks can even be justified, given not just what Netanyahu is doing, but also the rhetoric that he and his government are spreading about their future plans for Gaza. It's very difficult to see how the Palestinians accept to come to this sort of talks under the current circumstances. So he's made them come to the talks, but unlikely anything will come out of it.
Right. The Spanish Prime Minister, he attended the Arab League summit that we were covering earlier, and we'll do a bit later in this programme. And he spoke out against Israeli action in Gaza and said that Palestine is bleeding before our eyes. It is impossible to turn a blind eye to what is happening. But a blind eye is precisely what has been turned to the situation in Gaza by Western leaders, isn't it? But are we beginning to see that change now?
It is changing. It's definitely still turned, a blind eye is turned by the United States, and particularly, I think, sort of the deep state within the United States. But in Europe, there has been some change. The most recent and probably the most influential is the position of Macron. Macron in France, he's become much more vocal. And in fact, he was accused by Netanyahu of supporting Hamas simply because he acknowledged the massacres that are taking place on the ground, despite the fact that France is a very strong ally of Israel. And he was one of those who ran to the support of Israel when Iran targeted the Israeli state this time last year, in April last year. So things are changing, but very, very slow. And the real question is, how many Palestinians should it take before they really wake up to what's happening? I mean, the exchange ratio is incredible now. I don't know, 1,400 if you say Israelis were killed in this war. We're approaching 100,000 Palestinians, including those that are missing. So it's become unreal, and it's going to be a real shame for not just Israel, but the Europeans and anyone who tries to justify the position Netanyahu is taking at the moment.
Yes, you'd think sooner or later they will reflect on this, as more should have been done. But that's all we've got time for the time being, Sultan. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.